Picture a Roman man stepping out of a workout. He's sweating, covered in dust, and there is no soap anywhere in the building. So he does what every Roman did. He pours olive oil all over his own body, smears it into his skin until he's glistening, and then he picks up a curved metal blade and starts scraping himself like you'd scrape mud off a boot. And that thick, brownish paste that peels off his skin, the mix of oil and sweat and dead skin and grime, does not go in the trash. It gets collected, bottled, and sold to paying customers who genuinely wanted it. Hold that image, because I'm not going to tell you yet who was buying jars of scraped off human filth or what they thought it could do for them. That answer is coming, and it's stranger than you're guessing right now. Here's what I want you to stick around for. By the end of this, you'll know about the sponge on a stick that strangers shared in a public bathroom with no walls between them. You'll meet the Roman emperor who got rich, openly rich, by taxing pee. And then there's the part that flips this whole story on its head. All of this cleaning, the baths, the aqueducts, the sewers the rest of the world envied, may have actually made the Romans sicker, not cleaner. There's hard science behind that, and we'll get to it. So let's start with the obvious question. Why didn't the Romans just use soap? The strange thing is, they could have. Soap existed. The Romans knew about it, but they used it for washing wool and treating certain skin conditions, not for getting their bodies clean. The idea of lathering up with soap to bathe didn't really catch on until the later centuries of the empire. For most of Roman history, soap on your skin would have struck people as odd, maybe even a bit barbarian, since they associated it with the tribes up north. So instead, they built an entire cleaning method around two things: oil and a tool. The oil was usually olive oil, sometimes mixed with a gritty abrasive like fine sand or ground pumice to give it more bite. You rubbed it everywhere. The point was that oil clings to dirt. It loosens the sweat, the dust, the dead skin, and traps all of it on the surface of your body in a greasy film. And then comes the tool, the real star of Roman hygiene, the strigil. A strigil is a curved blade, usually bronze, shaped a bit like a flattened, dull hook. The curve matters because it's designed to follow the contours of your arms and legs and back. You drag it across oiled skin in long, firm strokes, and it lifts off the entire layer of oil and grime in one pass. Athletes used them constantly. Soldiers used them. The wealthy had personal ones made of silver, and they'd often have a slave do the scraping for the spots they couldn't reach. Done right, it actually worked. You came out genuinely clean, your skin exfoliated and soft, without a single bar of soap. Now, that paste the strigil scraped off. Remember the jars from the start. The Greeks had a name for that gunk, gloios, and it turns out the scrapings from famous athletes were collected and sold as a medicinal product. People believed this oily sweat paste from strong, admired bodies had healing properties. They'd rub it on aches, on inflammation, on injuries. So yes, there was a real market for the filth scraped off other people's skin, and the more celebrated the body it came from, the more it was worth. And here's where I get to clear up something you've almost certainly heard. There's a wildly popular claim that Roman women bought the scraped sweat of gladiators as an aphrodisiac, to rub on themselves or even to put on their faces. It shows up everywhere. The honest truth, when you look at the actual ancient sources, is that there's no solid evidence the Romans sold gladiator sweat as a love potion. That part is mostly modern legend, stitched together from a few real facts. That athletes' grime really was sold for medicine, that gladiators really were objects of desire and fascination, and that people loved gladiator-themed souvenirs, so the gunk was real and the trade was real. The aphrodisiac story is the embellishment. I'd rather give you the version that's actually true, because the truth here is weird enough on its own, so that's how a Roman cleaned the body. But cleaning wasn't a quick, private thing you did alone in a corner. It was a whole production, and it happened in public. Welcome to the baths. The Roman public baths, the thermae, were not just for washing. They were the social heart of the city, somewhere between a spa, a gym, a club, and the local pub. Entry was cheap. sometimes practically free, which meant nearly everyone could go, rich and poor alike. People did business there. They gossiped, ate, exercised, showed off, made deals, found dates. Bathing was the excuse. Society was the point, and there was a route you followed through the building. First, you'd strip down in a changing room called the apoditerium and hand your clothes to an attendant, or to your slave, because theft was a real problem. Then your skin got oiled up. From there, you moved through a sequence of rooms at rising temperatures. The tepidarium was warm, easing you in. The caldarium was the hot, steamy room, sometimes with a pool of hot water, and this is where you'd really start to sweat. Sweating was the goal, because that's what loosened everything trapped in the oil. Then out came the strigil, and you scraped yourself down or had someone do it for you. And to finish, you'd plunge into the frigidarium, a cold pool that snapped your pores shut and left you tingling and clean. Oil on, sweat it out, scrape it off, shock it cold. That was the cycle. No soap required, and honestly, not a bad system. If the story stopped here, you'd walk away thinking the Romans had hygiene figured out. But we've still got two promises to keep, and the first one involves something they collected by the bucket load, something you make every single day and flush without a second thought: urine. The Romans figured out that stale urine is chemically useful. When pee sits and ferments, it breaks down and releases ammonia, and ammonia is a genuinely powerful cleaning agent. It cuts through grease and lifts out stains. We still use ammonia-based cleaners today. The Romans just got theirs from the most renewable source imaginable. Their laundries, run by workers called fullers, used urine as detergent. Togas were white wool stains and yellows fast, and keeping them bright was a constant battle. So the fullers would soak the garments in tubs of diluted, fermented urine and then stomp on them with their bare feet to work the ammonia through the cloth. It was foul, smelly work, and fullers were looked down on socially for it. But it worked so well that they were also among the better paid trades in the city. Where did all the urine come from? Pots were left out on street corners for passers-by to fill up, and people did, generously. There was so much money flowing through this pee economy that the government noticed. The Emperor Vespasian slapped a tax on the collection of urine. The story goes that his own son was disgusted that taxing pee was beneath the dignity of an emperor, so Vespasian supposedly held up a gold coin from the tax revenue and asked his son whether it stank. The son said no, and Vespasian replied, more or less, and yet it comes from urine. That's where the Latin phrase pecunia non olet comes from. Money doesn't stink. A line about pee taxes that people still quote 2,000 years later. Now, you've probably also heard that Romans brushed their teeth with urine. Let me be precise, because the reality is more interesting than the meme. Yes, ammonia in urine can whiten, and urine did get used as a mouthwash and tooth whitener in the ancient world. But the Romans saw this as a foreign habit. They specifically pinned it on the people of the Iberian Peninsula, ancient Spain and Portugal. The poet Catullus actually wrote a savage little poem mocking a man with suspiciously gleaming white teeth, basically saying, "We all know what you've been rinsing with, and it's revolting." So the next time someone tells you Romans loved brushing with pee, you can tell them the Romans were the ones making fun of it. Let me pause here for a second, because if you're enjoying this, the stuff coming next is exactly the kind of thing this channel is built on. The Romans I'm about to describe were doing something in their public bathrooms that genuinely changes how you picture the ancient world, and the twist at the end of this video is the part most people have never heard. If that's your kind of story, the dark, weirdly human side of history that the textbooks skip, hit subscribe so the next one finds you, because we're about to walk into the public toilet, and there are no walls. Roman public latrines, called foracae, were communal in a way that's hard to wrap your head around today. Picture a long stone bench running around the walls of a room with a row of holes cut into it, side by side, close together. No stalls, no dividers, no doors. You sat down next to a complete stranger, and another stranger sat down next to you, and you all did your business together while chatting about the day. Going to the toilet was a social activity, just like the baths. Underneath the bench ran a channel of constantly flowing water that carried the waste away, fed by the same engineering that made Rome famous, the aqueducts and the great sewer, the Cloaca Maxima. And here is the detail you came for. There was no toilet paper. What they had, at least in many of these latrines, was a sea sponge fixed to the end of a wooden stick. It's called a tersorium, sometimes a xylospongium. You'd reach for it, clean yourself with the sponge, and then rinse it in the channel of running water, or in a little gutter of water and vinegar or salt water that ran along the floor in front of the bench. And then, brace yourself, you put it back for the next person. Now, I want to be straight with you because this is one of those places where historians genuinely argue. The popular image is that everyone shared one communal sponge, and that's the horror story everyone repeats. But some serious scholars think the sponge on a stick may actually have been a tool for cleaning the toilet itself, scrubbing the holes and the bench, rather than cleaning the person. The truth is we're piecing this together from scattered mentions and a bit of archaeology, and the sources don't fully agree. What we can say with confidence is that public, side-by-side, wall-less toilets were absolutely real. The sponge tool was real, and the vinegar and salt water were real attempts at keeping it sanitary. Whether you personally shared that sponge with the man next to you is the part lost to history. Sleep well with that uncertainty. So now you've got the full picture. Oil and a scraper instead of soap. Cheap public baths that doubled as the town square. Ammonia from urine doing the laundry. Aqueducts pouring in fresh water. Sewers hauling waste away. Public toilets flushed by running streams. By the standards of the ancient world, this is staggeringly advanced. No other civilization around them was doing anything close. So the Romans must have been the healthiest, cleanest people of their age, right? This is the part I promised you, and it's where everything turns. A few years ago, a researcher at the University of Cambridge named Piers Mitchell went looking for the proof. He gathered the evidence from across the Roman world, the stuff preserved in ancient toilets, in old sewer sediment, in burial sites, even in fossilized human waste, and he checked it for parasites. His expectation, everyone's expectation, was simple. All those baths and toilets and sewers should mean the Romans had fewer parasites than the messier peoples who came before them. That's not what he found, not even close. Intestinal parasites, the whipworm, the roundworm, the organisms behind dysentery did not go down when the Romans rolled in with their plumbing. They went up. Compared to the Iron Age people before them, who had none of this technology, the Romans were just as infested, and in some places more so, all that sanitation, and the worms were thriving. So what on earth went wrong? Start with the baths, the very symbol of Roman cleanliness. That warm water often wasn't changed for days, sometimes longer. Now imagine a heated pool that dozens, maybe hundreds of people climb into, each of them coated in oil and the loosened grime scraped off their skin. A film of human scum floated on the surface. The sick bathed alongside the healthy. People with open wounds soaked in the same water as everyone else. The warm, dirty, rarely refreshed water of a Roman bath was, by our standards, closer to a bacterial soup than a clean pool. The thing that made them feel cleanest may have been quietly passing infections around. Then there's that sponge, if it really was shared, moving from body to body with only a rinse in between. Then the toilets, where the same flowing water and the same surfaces were used by everyone in turn. But the biggest culprit might be what the Romans did with all the waste their wonderful sewers collected. A lot of human excrement didn't just vanish out to sea. It got harvested and sold as fertilizer and spread across the fields where they grew their food. If that waste isn't composted long enough to kill the parasite eggs, and theirs often wasn't, then you are planting your crops in infection and then eating it. The parasites complete the loop, out one end onto the field, into the vegetables, back into the next person. The sanitation system that looked like it was removing the problem was, in part, recycling it straight back onto the dinner table. And one more. The Romans were obsessed with a fermented fish sauce called garum. They put it on everything. It was usually made without cooking from fish, and fish carry tapeworm. So a national love affair with raw fermented fish sauce appears to have spread fish tapeworm right across the empire, even reaching cold northern regions where it had been rare before. Wherever Roman taste went, the tapeworm followed. So let's go back to the question we started with. How did the Romans stay clean with no soap? The honest answer is that they had two completely different kinds of clean, and they only mastered one of them. On the surface, on the skin you could see and smell, they were genuinely clean, maybe cleaner than people would be again for over 1,000 years after the empire fell. The oil and the strigil really did scrape a body spotless. The baths really did leave you feeling refreshed and looking presentable. To the eye and the nose, a Roman was clean, but clean in the way we mean it, free of the invisible things that make you sick. They absolutely were not. They couldn't see bacteria. They had no idea parasites were riding in their bathwater, on their shared sponge, in their fertilized vegetables, in their beloved fish sauce. So they built the most impressive sanitation machine the ancient world had ever seen, felt cleaner than anyone alive, and stayed riddled with worms the entire time. They were spotless on the outside and infested on the inside, and they went their whole lives never knowing the difference. That's the real story the marble statues don't tell you, and it's the kind of story we dig up here all the time, the version of history that's messier, stranger, and a lot more human than the one you got in school. If you want more of it, you already know where the subscribe button is. I'll see you in the next one.